Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Candid show. I am Shriram and I'll be your host for you this evening. So, an important news is that Krishna couldn't make it to this podcast sadly because he was feeling feverish, so he had to sit this one out. So, I'll be soloing on this podcast. So, to talk about today's topic, I'll give a brief introduction on what it actually is. Again, I have picked up another orthodox topic again. Difficult topic definitely because I had to do a little bit of research on it, come up with very important or better points, by the way, which I can educate the listeners as well as I also can gain knowledge. So, without further ado, the topic of which I'm going to speak about today is LGBT community. So, before we actually jump right into the topic, I would like to actually tell what does LGBTQ stand for. So, L stands for lesbian, B stands for bisexual, G stands for gay, and T stands for transgender. So this is a group of community, or rather it has become a social movement these days, where they kind of have a common and shared perspective of getting social equality, and it is kind of a safe space for all the members of this community to feel safe and kind of voice out their opinion without the feeling of getting judged by the society. And the discrimination they face every day is just keeps increasing exponentially, which I'll talk about later in the episode. So, to start off with a very important question, I think, which most of us kind of have in our mind, or any kind of a person who's new to this kind of a concept will kind of ask the question, is that whether homosexuality is actually a choice, or to rephrase it in a better way, do we actually have control over our sexuality? Are we the single most determiners of our sexuality, or whether it is genetically determined? So the answer to the question is actually given by the doctors. So before I actually go into that, I think I'd like to talk about the religious groups of the people, or the people who kind of oppose this kind of thinking, where they kind of argue homosexuality being a sin, or it is not being not accepted in society, or they are not people. Even they go to even these people, some people go to the extent whereas they kind of start labeling them as devils or spawns of hell, and very derogatory terms, which is completely inappropriate and very hurting for them. So in that way, the religious people kind of have a very bad notion and a twisted opinion on homosexuality. So to know answer the actual question as to whether homosexuality is genetic, and yes, it is genetic. So as the initially, like in the early phases, the initial theory which was put forward was actually an effect called the fraternal birth order effect. So which basically tells that the as how many male offsprings a family has, so there is more chance the child has a chance to desire men. So basically, if in a family a child has more brothers, basically a male child has more and more brothers, so that kind of exponentially increases chances to become gay. So this was kind of like a theory which was put forward in the early 80s or 90s, and it was kind of labeled as an environmental reason, or rather evolution by the nature. And later scientists actually came up with actually a proper explanation, a scientific explanation as to why homosexuality is actually a thing. So in males, they have a genetic condition called androgen insensitivity syndrome, which can actually lead to the development of female genitalia, and usually the masculinity causing testosterone is less in them, so they kind of grow up to desire men basically. And similarly, in the case of females, they have a genetic condition called congenital adrenal hyperplasia, which is basically indicating they have high levels of male testosterone in their body, so they kind of prefer, they have a masculine kind of a brain, and they kind of become lesbian, or lesbianism kind of becomes a dominant factor in their brains. So yeah, this is kind of like the question, answering the question as to whether homosexuality is actually a choice. So the answer is, it is not a choice, it is kind of genetically determined, but answer is definitely not that place straightforward, because as I'll talk about it later, it's kind of a choice, or it's kind of a thing which you have to make up your mind actually to come out with, because many people kind of with live being male or female, they kind of get stuck into these binary kind of fields, whereas they always think I'll only belong to male or female, or me feeling any kind of attraction towards my similar genders is kind of wrong. So they kind of convince themselves and are always in denial that they always belong to these two categories. So that is the answer to that question. And so moving on, I'd like to focus on what is LGBTQ as an organization, or what it stands for basically. So as I told you before, it is kind of a safe place for all the homosexual people in the society, and it has kind of evolved into a social movement now. And in the early 80s and 90s, America had very strict policies on gay people coming out, and they kind of were very oppressive towards the idea that gay people shouldn't be able to own houses, or they had several restrictions. The US government imposed a lot of restrictions on their livelihood, and definitely something had to be done to oppose the government, and that is when the organization was formed by a couple of people, and they bolstered up the courage to go up against the government. And that definitely is something which we should which all the gay people are definitely proud of, because if it weren't for that kind of a group of people coming out early and actually forming an organization, there wouldn't be nothing as of now, and gay people would still be kind of discriminated to a crazy extent in our society. So it is a LGBTQ organization is like something very big, a very big landmark, or a very big achievement for the gay people in terms of their progress towards social development and economic development. So yeah, the very primary goal or the primary objective of this organization is basically to have social equality, or their common goal is kind of like to get equal access to all of the public facilities, or kind of get equal opportunities in workplace, especially because most of these workplaces do not accept homosexual people. They kind of have these these policies where they do not allow any kind of homosexual people to work, or they might pollute the work environment and stuff like that. So since they don't have equal opportunities in every part of the society, so this organization as a whole, or this movement as a whole, kind of has a primary objective of giving social equality to these people. And around the 80s or 90s, this organization was actually the primary movement in breaking the anti-sodomy laws, which kind of existed in the US in the 80s, and which were actually extremely harsh on these people, because as we already know, the people who were very orthodoxic back then, and they just couldn't accept the kind of people actually emerging through. And this was also something I wanted to talk about, because I think people kind of treat them as aliens, or these homosexuals as aliens, or they kind of don't accept them in the society. But I think we have to start thinking more radically, or more have an open approach on life, especially I think, because without these kind of radical thinking, or out of the box thinking, or maybe a broader sense of perspective, we kind of wouldn't even have evolved, personally I think. Because basically any kind of a technological evolution, or to kind of say where we are right now at this point in this world, definitely has required a lot of critical thinking, or maybe basically like having a broader sense of perspective, or basically thinking out of the box, or being a radical thinker. Because most of the great scientific inventions, even though we kind of know that necessity is the mother of invention, necessity alone would not definitely solve the problem, I think, personally speaking. Because just because you have a kind of a necessity to create something doesn't mean you will definitely create something. Even though Thomas Alva Edison kind of invented the bulb because he had a necessity to, but at the end of the day, he had to definitely be a radical thinker, definitely, away from the society, or undoubtedly have kind of like a different kind of a perspective on the way he thinked. So I think any kind of an advancement, be it technological, be it social, has definitely occurred over these few years, only because radical thinkers or perspective kind of thinkers kind of dominated the world. So I feel we have to be much more open to this fact, and I think we have to be much more forgiving to them in that way, I think, because having a kind of broader sense over this kind of topic gives them a lot of respect. Because I think our people, especially Indian people, are kind of very narrow minded in a lot of topics, which I will cover in the later podcast. So I think that is the problem with India, because we always have kind of like a narrow perspective on things. We kind of see them only in one dimensionally. We don't see it from very different angles, because we are convinced that the angle which we see it in actually is correct, but we don't see that a problem could have multiple solutions, or multiple solutions to a problem. And that way I think definitely I think Indian people are definitely behind in terms of being open, or being accepting of the different ideas in the society, I think. Okay, so moving on, I think I'd like to shed light on maybe two of the important personalities in the mainstream world, or LGBTQ or homosexual personalities, who kind of I like them especially because of their personality. So one of them is Ellen DeGeneres, I think, because most of you may not know her. I think she has a talk show called The Ellen Show, and she's one of the most phenomenal hosts, personally I think, because she has this magnetic and vibrant personality where she kind of pulls the audience towards herself. Like most of her shows are so entertaining that you can't take your eyes off of them. And she has this very different unique pattern of TV shows where, unlike any kind of a show which we Indians have, like stereotypical like a standard dance show or a singing show or a normal interview show rather, where they always crack corny jokes, there she actually kind of has some kind of a conversation with them, sensible conversation to be pretty precise. So in that way I think, and she's also an LGBTQ activist as well, and she's a phenomenal comedian, by the way, because people who would have seen the show might have related to me, because people who haven't seen definitely cannot relate. So I would say definitely go check her out, because I think she's one of the most phenomenal human beings I've ever seen. So that is one of my personalities, I think. And next up, the tech giant or the tech industry, basically Tim Cook. And we all know Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, one of the biggest sci-fi tech personalities in this world, and the current CEO of Apple. And he came out in 2014 stating he was gay, and he was extremely happy to be gay, and also being gay was a gift given to him by God, and he was fundamentally very positive and open to the idea of him being gay. And also, quote unquote, this was told by Tim Cook himself when he came out as gay. He told that basically him coming out, if it helps people, or people who are like basically struggle to come out, or people who are kind of scared to come out, he kind of told that maybe if I could come out and be bold and talk about this thing, I think it will definitely encourage many of these people who are kind of scared to come out, scared to come tell to their parents about their sexuality, because I think that was definitely such a courageous thing which Tim Cook did, because I think it takes a lot of courage to be at that kind of a position where you are and still be able to reveal about your personal life, even though he told he kind of suffered huge losses for it, because I think people would have initially not been open to the fact that he was gay, but definitely he would have lost some kind of business, or definitely would have lost something to actually be open about his sexuality. But he still says up to date that me being open about my sexuality, if it kind of helps any person or helps in them identifying their sexuality and kind of being open about it and being proud about it, and then it is no kind of a problem for me. And in that way I think Tim Cook is an excellent human being, personally thinking, and I always look up to him as a very big role model. So yeah, these are kind of the two people I think who kind of in the LGBTQ mainstream world have kind of inspired me, or kind of I love them basically in watching on TV and such that. So as we near the end, I think we have to tackle the elephant in the room, which is basically the struggles faced by this community. So starting with the first, which is the most important thing personally, the violence. So this is something which is only common in the US especially, I think. And mostly this is like 1/5 of this is basically hate crime. So basically the people in US are definitely not accepting of this fact. They're extremely rude in their approach, and in fact that is one of the most leading crimes in US also. And people kind of have this mentality in the US where violence is the answer to any kind of a problem. As we already know, they are very violent people, the US people especially. So I think violence is one of the biggest struggles, in fact the biggest enemy which the gay people face in the current world. And the second half would be the parenting problem, I think, because this is one of the most like root cause basically, or the root struggle faced by any kind of a person who's trying to actually come out, because I think the parents kind of all play a very fundamental role in the child's life. And when the child actually comes out and kind of admits his sexuality, or kind of he tries to be honest about it, I think the parents should be more accepting, or have or give the child more positive reaffirmations that it is definitely okay that you can be whoever you want, or because at the end of the day it is going to be your life, and you are going to be you are going to live your life, so you can live it however you want. And I think parents should have that kind of a mentality, I think. But these days most of the Indian parents especially do not have this kind of a mentality, or any parents, to be honest, because to kind of think with their perspective also, this is all new to them. So I can fairly understand the reaction which they kind of show their child when the child comes out. But I think the parents should be definitely aware of things like this, because they shouldn't be caught by surprise, or they shouldn't have kind of like a surprise reaction on when the child comes out about his sexuality, and should definitely be more appreciative of it, and kind of applaud him or her for the amount of braveness which he had showed to coming out, because personally I think it kind of requires a lot of courage for you to openly admit your sexuality, especially when you are so confused about it, or especially when you had to think a lot about it, especially when you have to introspect a lot on that one particular idea. So I think the parents kind of like play a very very important role in actually what do you say in actually kind of reducing the hate crimes against these gay people also, because when the parents are definitely supportive, the child has definitely a lot of confidence, and even if he faces bullies at school, he kind of has this positive thought that their parents are there to kind of help him to cope up in life. So I think the parents are kind of like a very big support system while coming out to basically. So I think the parents have a very big role in the child's if you in the childhood, when he actually tries to approach them in regards about his sexual life. So yeah, so I think the last thing or the most important thing which I'd like to talk about is religion, and I think this is the single most biggest struggle faced by any kind of a community, including the LGBT community as well, because religion is like this very narrow or a very narrow path. There is like basically just a very single dimensional thinking which most religious people have, or even any kind of people in general, I think, because they have this kind of skewed thinking, whereas they think what they are telling is correct, or what their way of life is basically correct. So in that way I think the religious people kind of have a skewed mentality over this issue, and I also think that their mentality is completely wrong and unfair, and I think they have to try to be more open, at least, because I know that is going to be a definitely hard thing for them, because they have been just they have used to being believing these things which their parents have told, or things which the Bible has told, or things basically which they have read over the past 20 or 30 years or so. And I think suddenly changing them at this point is definitely going to be difficult for them. But I think these religious people kind of have to try to have at least a much more open mind, even though that is not going to be possible, I think, because they have been used to this kind of a singular way of thinking, I think. So I think especially the religious people should kind of have a positive mentality towards this, because I think since they are a large in number also, I think they kind of have a impact on the society also. So I think religion is something which is definitely a roadblock in any kind of society, be it Indian or any kind of society especially. And there are so in that way I think so these are all the struggles, I think, basically which these people face. So on a concluding note, I'd like to say, if any of you have any kind of a friend who's homosexual, who is kind of scared to come out, or who's showing symptoms of being, or who's like basically what do you say, kind of like scared to admit his sexuality, I think you have to kind of give him positive affirmations that it is okay and it is your life, and at the end of the day you are going to decide it, you are going to live it, and others are not going to be able to do not have a say in your life, or they can give their opinion, that's for sure, but at the end of the day you are going to live your life, and I think you get to have a say in it, basically. So this is my request to all the people, and if you see any kind of homosexual people when you meet in the society, or meet in the any kind of a public gathering, and I think you should be respectful of their fact, or you shouldn't kind of like tease them, or because I've seen a lot of people doing it because they don't understand what it is, so they kind of tease them. So this episode was basically like an eye opener for the people who don't have an idea on who these people are. So basically that was what my aim about this whole discussion in short. So yeah, that will be it for today, guys. I know it was a very short episode because I didn't have Krishna with me, so I couldn't talk a lot, basically, because it was like being a one-man conversation, basically. So in that way, that is it for today, guys. I hope you like the podcast, and definitely share your opinions or comments in the comment section below. And thank you for listening to me, guys. Stay tuned for more content. Bye.